before mirrors existed, you had never once seen your own face. For almost all of human history, that was simply true. Long before cities, before agriculture, before anything polished, you lived in small wandering bands. You slept in caves and rock shelters and under simple skin tents. For 99% of human history, no one had ever made a mirror. For 300,000 years, your ancestors went their whole lives without one. Most of the time, the only reflective surface you ever met was a still pool of water. And even then, it barely told the truth. Long before you ever knew your own face, you knew the faces of the people around you. But the question of what you yourself looked like, that one stayed unanswered for a very long time. You learned your bandmates' faces by touch, by sound, by the way they moved. You learned the angle of a jaw, the depth of an eye socket, the ridge of a brow, all with your fingertips. Then one day you tried to feel your own face, and you could not. Your hands could not both reach your own face at once. You could not pinch your own cheek, or press your own eye, or trace your own brow. The face of the self was the one face you could never quite meet. You discovered your shadow long before you ever saw your reflection. It was black and flat, and moved when you moved, but it had no face. You tried to grab it once, and of course you could not. You learned that other people had shadows too, and that they came from the sun. The sun was the only mirror your ancestors trusted, and even that one only showed silhouettes. You learned other people's faces by watching how they moved, how they squatted, how they walked. You could watch your bandmates scratch, eat, walk, gesture, and start to map their bodies in your head. You could not see your own back, your own gait, your own silhouette moving through the world. You learned the world before yourself. Other people cleaned your back, pick your ticks, scratch your itches. You could not reach the center of your own back, the back of your own head, the top of your own skull. You could clean your own teeth with a grass stem, but you could not really see what was happening in there. When you lost a tooth, you felt the gap with your tongue, but you never saw the empty socket. You saw your friend's teeth, but you never saw your own. When you got a scar, you felt the weld under your finger, but you did not know what shape it made on your skin. Your bandmates could see your scars and know your stories, but you could not. You could hear your own laugh, but you never saw the way your face twisted when you made it. You touched other people's faces far more often than your own. And you learned, very early, to recognize people by their silhouettes and their walk before their faces. Which is to say, your sense of self was built almost entirely from the outside in. But sometimes, you did catch a glimpse of yourself. In a still pool, late at night, or early in the morning, you might see a face staring back. And the first time, you probably thought it was somebody else. You reached for the other face, and your reflection reached back. The water wobbled, and the other face disappeared with it. You had to wait for the water to go still again, and it never held for long. And when it did, the face you saw was always darker, blurrier, and reversed. Anything you did with one hand appeared on the other. A face that did the opposite of what you did, in a world where you were used to the world matching you. It must have been the strangest thing you had ever seen, the first time you understood it was you. Some ancient human, somewhere, on some still morning, looked down and realized the other face was his own. Then a breath of wind came, and the picture was gone again. Water was a mirror you could not carry and could not trust. On a moonlit night, you could see yourself only as a dark shape under the moon. Most of the time, your first self-portrait was a stranger. But you also met another kind of mirror by accident in riverbeds. A wet, flat stone could show a face too, if you polished it just right. Most stones were useless, but every now and then one caught a glimpse. A volcanic glass like Obsidian, polished smooth, could show more than any other stone. You had to rub it for hours until the surface went from rough to glassy. And when you did, the surface was so dark it almost felt like a window into a shadow. The first time you saw a clear face in a stone, you probably said that out loud to no one. And then you sat with it for a long time, just looking. But a stone mirror was fragile and small, and you had to know where to find one. So for most people, the polished stone mirror was rare and precious and traded across long distances. For most of prehistory, a mirror was a thing you heard about before you ever held one. And when you did get one, the first thing you did was show it to somebody else. A small crowd of 3 or 4 pressed in, taking turns, each face a new surprise. But you also built your own mirror in a way on your own body. You took red ochre, ground it to powder, mixed it with animal fat or water. And you painted yourself with it in red lines, red dots, red handprints. You could not see your whole face, but you could see the parts you had marked. You could see the colors you had put on your own arms, even if the rest was still a stranger. And sometimes, by the water, you could watch yourself apply the paint in real time. White clay, yellow ochre, charcoal black. You had a whole palette to work with. The marks you made stuck around long enough to feel like part of you. Each pattern, each mark, each color was a choice you made about who you were. You could also cut your skin on purpose and let it heal into a raised line that would never wash off. Your bandmates helped, since you could not easily reach your own shoulder to make the marks there. You could also hang shells, teeth, bones around your neck and feel them move when you walked. You could stick a feather in your hair, and you could feel the weight of it. Layered together, you were a walking picture of yourself. And in a still pool, you could finally see the picture whole. For most of your life, the self you wore was the self you knew. Other people were how you measured your own decoration, and how they measured you back. Children watched the painted adults and learned what their own faces might one day carry. But you also started painting things that were not your own body. The oldest handprints in the world are red ochre prints on cave walls, blown around an outstretched palm. Some are 40,000 years old, and they are still unmistakably a person's hand. And tucked in among the adults, you sometimes find a small print of a child, a clear signature. The first pictures ancient humans ever made of themselves were not faces. They were hands, and then animals, and then the world around them. And finally, the human form, drawn on the wall in red ochre and black charcoal. You carved the small Venus figurines, exaggerated curves with no face. That may or may not have been you. You carved ivory and bone, drew a head and a torso, and never drew a face. You scratched tally marks on bones, and you carved small patterns into the handles of your tools. These were not art for art's sake. They were a kind of signature. This axe was mine, this arrow was mine, this knife was mine. Two hunters could tell whose arrow had killed which animal, even after the fact. In a world without faces, you carried your identity in the things you owned and the marks you made on them. The first time you ever saw your name was when you saw your own mark on your own spear. Long before writing, you marked small clay lumps with your thumbprint, your own small self in soft earth. And then came the heaviest mirror of all, the one no one could look into. When somebody in the band died, you could not look at them in the water and see what they had really looked like. You remembered them by their walk, their scars, their laugh, and the marks they carried on their body. You sprinkled red ochre over the body, and you placed their tools beside them, so the dead would not be faceless in the dark. You covered the grave with stones and branches, and walked away carrying the weight of a face you had never really seen. A person could be a part of your life for 50 years, and you would still never have known what they actually looked like. So you left a mark of your own, a final signature beside the dead. When the band told stories around the fire, they told each other what people looked like. He had a long jaw, and a scar here, and a gap in his teeth. Faces lived in language, in the descriptions of others, in the memory of the living. And that was true for almost the entire run of our species. Then, slowly, things started to change. Around 8,000 years ago, somebody polished a piece of obsidian until it gleamed like dark water. And for the first time, a person could see their own face in something that fit in their hand. It was small and dark, and you had to hold it just right. But it was you, in a way that the still pool had never been. And for the first time, the face looking back was not a stranger, but a person you recognized. It was small and rare, and most people in the world never held one in their entire life. But the few who did started to see themselves properly for the first time. That small dark disc changed more than anybody expected, because once you saw yourself, you could not unsee yourself. You started noticing every mark on your own face, every line, every scar. You touched the scar again, the one you had felt 100 times, and you saw it for the first time. You started to wonder what you looked like to other people. You passed the disc to a friend and watched their face change as they saw themselves for the first time too. You made faces at yourself just to see what your own face did. 3 friends with 3 discs, all looking at themselves at the same time. And the painted face, the one you had built so carefully, suddenly had a new layer underneath it. You. The mirror was small, but the idea it carried was enormous. Because a person who has seen their own face can never quite go back to a world where they had not. Your face had always been there, of course. It had been with you from the very first morning, on every still pool, in every shadow. But you had to meet it slowly, by accident through water and stone and the hands of others. And once you had, the whole world shifted, even if you could not have said exactly how. The face was always there. You just had to meet it. Next time you look in a mirror, remember, you are looking at a luxury that almost nobody in history had. And your ancestors, who never had one, lived with a stranger, deeper sense of self than we can really imagine. They knew themselves through other people, through tools, through stories, through the marks on their own skin. It was a slower self, a self built from the outside in, and it lasted for almost the whole run of our species. So the next time you look at a still pool, or a dark window, or a polished stone, pause. Imagine meeting your own face for the very first time, and then imagine never seeing it at all for your whole life until somebody handed you a dark, polished stone.